We continue to familiarize ourselves with the main provisions of the sufficiently general theory of control. Having already familiarized ourselves with much, we now tackle one of the complex, perhaps the most complex questions within the sufficiently general theory of control. This is the consideration of processes occurring in supersystems. In our previous sessions, we briefly familiarized ourselves with what supersystems are. That is, super means a super complex system. And in science, this definition is given to super complex systems. It consists of many identical, similar elements that have memory. Each little element has memory. Based on this memory, the element can self-manage, and it can transmit information to other elements similar to it. Thus, by managing these other elements, it can receive information from other elements of the supersystem, and whether willingly or unwillingly, somehow react to the information it has received. That is, other information in relation to this element is control information, whether we want it or not. Such supersystems in general are called, they are based on computing technology. And when it is necessary to solve many tasks, well, in particular, I have already mentioned, during the exploration of outer space, when satellites are flying, the rocket is being prepared. I served at the Baikonur Cosmodrome, and in the management of satellites, that is, super complex systems are used. Just imagine a car flying in orbit. So we cannot touch it. Therefore, all this is done using telemetry systems that transmit information about pressure, temperature, and water supply. And if there is a living person in this vehicle, then information about them needs to be processed. You can't steer with your hands, so it is necessary to control it using radio commands. Why am I saying this? In principle, all these questions, processes occurring in supersystems, are defined and formalized in science one way or another. And in principle, it was possible to use the developments that existed, applicable to other processes. What other processes? And if we look at people this way, what do we represent? We represent the same supersystem. That is, each person has memory, based on which he somehow self-governs, lives, and communicates with other people. He transmits information to other elements, similar people, through voice, books, his activities, and other means. He receives information from other people. Thus, everything affects him through phone calls, literature, and so on. That is, human society is also a kind of supersystem. And now, what we discussed when we reflected a bit on what intelligence is in the previous session, it turns out that similar processes also occur in the universe. The sun transmits information to the planets, including Earth. And what information? A flare on the sun, bang. And in people, the cardiovascular system contracted. So the stone heated up, cooled down, bang, it crumbled. That is, these processes. And now imagine we have considered the sun and Earth. What about the moon? Tides on Earth. That is, it attracts water at certain ratios of the positions of the planets and so on. Other planets also have an effect. And if you analyze it this way, it turns out that the entire universe is a super duper complex system. And similar processes also occur in it, meaning information is transmitted, controlling other elements of the universe and so on. Now we will thoroughly examine how all of this is done. Why exactly are we considering this? Not just for any reason, to ponder casually. Although this is interesting in itself, the processes occurring in supersystems, but we will transform all of this that is represented in relation to human life, because it is possible and necessary and even essential to consider these questions in relation to the processes occurring in the universe. But since humanity is currently in crisis, what examples should we give? The best focus is on the life, society. And human society is a kind of supersystem, which is embedded in other supersystems. This is what the discussion will generally be about. What processes are occurring in relation to us, and what should we do to live decently and happily in this super duper universe? How to build our lives. Therefore, we need to know some basics. We will now talk about these basics. We say that the universe as a whole is a kind of supercomplex system. The entire universe presents itself as an encompassing supersystem in relation to the multitude of mutually embedded supersystems that exist. And these mutual supersystems, mutual embedding, an attempt to depict graphically what mutual embedding means, and they exist in parallel. That is, if we denote one element of the supersystem with zeros, this is one element, another element, a third, and so on. There are many elements, and another supersystem denotes its elements with pluses. Here is a plus, 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 and you see they exist together, although they are different supersystems. Here, in the lower picture, several supersystems are drawn. Here, they are already marked with dots. So, here one supersystem is represented by the red minus signs. The blue one represents the plus signs. This is the second. Here is the third. And when they, you see, mutually enter into each other, they become mutually embedded. This is what is meant by the mutual embedding of supersystems. Supersystems in various forms and capabilities can have intelligence, such as in different contexts. And this is indeed what we are talking about. Intelligence is always present when there is a comprehensive control function. That is, we have already mentioned several times that in a complete control function, if someone is managing something, they must necessarily recognize the factors that affect their system, including themselves. If he is managing, then he must develop a management goal. That is, where to lead his object of control, how to achieve the intended goal, and so on. And this implies creativity. And creativity can only be achieved through intelligence, as it is the ability to generate new informational modules that were not previously characteristic of you. You didn't know this, but you took a moment to think and formed a new informational module in order to implement your preconceptions, to carry out management. Therefore, intelligence is always present where there is a complete control function, and it can be either in the supersystem itself or in the encompassing and hierarchically higher management in relation to the supersystem. And here, intelligence can be external in relation to the supersystem. Here we see a fragment. They will always place pictures, such as family photos, furthermore into themselves. So, we will denote the supersystem like this. And its elements, you see these little blue circles, that is, this is the supersystem. Of course, don't think that this is a literal representation. It is a conditional graphic depiction to visually represent this in some way. But in reality, this is not on a plane, and not even in three-dimensional space, but it is multidimensional. What we discussed, what is a multidimensional matrix? That is, there is a two-dimensional axis of abscisses and a three-dimensional ordinate, but we cannot graphically represent it in multidimensional form. So this is purely a conditional representation. Don't think that this is actually the case. This is the supersystem. There is always a hierarchically highest encompassing control, that is God, who governs everything in the universe. And here, in relation to this, there is intelligence that is in some other supersystem. It is external to this supersystem. Could be internal intelligence. And in this picture, it is depicted that inside this supersystem, there is intelligence. And it influences all other elements of the supersystem. That is, it is internal. Thus, the intelligence can be possessed by the components of the supersystem themselves, by a subset of some components of the supersystem, or by individual components, or one or several components that have within their structure elements possessing intelligence, such as the grounding of intelligence on various elements of the supersystem can indeed be very diverse. Coupled intelligence. What does coupled intelligence mean? It is the self-management of the supersystem as a whole within the framework of hierarchically highest encompassing control, regardless of its localization in relation to the supersystem. It can be, as we said, external, or it can be internal. Types of supersystems. What kinds of supersystems can there be? This applies to the entire universe. And now we will also say, in relation to all of humanity, bone supersystems, indeed, from the word bone, are rigid. They exist stably in a certain balancing mode as long as their constituent elements exist. A supersystem with a renewable element base. A supersystem with a renewable element base. So, what do you think? Is human society on planet Earth rigid, or does it have a renewable element base with a renewable one? That is, elements leave for another world and new ones are renewed. That is, we are a supersystem with a renewable element base. Evolving supersystems, those whose elements possess a certain reserve of stability and have some potential for development. And let's ask ourselves the question, are we, human society, an evolving supersystem or a rigid, stagnant one? We have both a renewable element base and are evolving. Why? Because we have already gone through that each element has genetically determined potentials for development, remember. And in general, all these elements as a whole, as a supersystem now, possess the corresponding potential that it must master in the process of its development. And here we come to the question, when does the development of the supersystem begin? At some point, our supersystem was created as a result of a cascade of mutations. Remember, we talked about when the proto-human appeared, the human that exists now, and he was genetically closed in relation to the ancestors that gave rise to him. So now, from the perspective of what we are talking about, it turns out that the supersystem, which was introduced into the encompassing supersystem, probably had some kind of purpose. And the one that existed before, it gave rise to the existing supersystem and faded into oblivion. This, generally speaking, is a serious matter. So, what is it about? Why do we live? And what will happen to us as humanity after we master our developmental potential as intended by God? And we must transition into some new quality, which various teachings talk about. So how will the transition to some other state occur? To which one? But only God knows. And for now, we can only guess, predict, suspect, receive revelations and hints from Him, and so on. What we have just discussed is illustrated on this poster you see under the heading Localization, the beginning of the process of mastering developmental potential. That is, when a supersystem appears, there is a certain environment, you see it is illustrated. The environment is under the control of a hierarchically higher encompassing management, and the supersystem is introduced into this environment for certain purposes. That is, it did not just appear out of nowhere. No. That is, management cannot be aimless in principle. That is, if something is done, it always has a specific purpose. And in the same way, humanity was introduced. Speaking in scientific terms, and in layman's terms, people appeared on Earth. And in fact, it was introduced because all processes are managed. A supersystem was introduced to achieve certain goals. And this is the time for the beginning of adaptation. That is, the adaptation of the supersystem to the environment and the realization of its genetic potential. This is the beginning of the functioning of the supersystem. The environment consists of the processes that the supersystem deals with. And these processes have their material, informational, and mixed impact on the supersystem. All this impact of the environment on the supersystem, that is, on people. The rains were falling, the winds were blowing. So, well, there were various things. Diseases attacked, beasts, that is, the environment acted, and people reflected all of this. Therefore, all this leads to the emergence of the characteristics of biological species. And if we talk about supersystems, then also other animal species. So what is a certain supersystem? And the supersystem as a whole, its fragments, elements in the universal world. Under this influence have two types of localization: spatial localization and informational localization. What is this? An illustration of spatial localization indeed. After all, we say that space and time are in fact subjective characteristics brought by humans. That is, an example of such spatial localization is subjectivism in assessment. It is a private measure by which certain parameters can be measured. An example of spatial localization is the heliocentric model of the solar system. Here it is drawn, the sun. The planets revolve around the sun. This is a certain supersystem. The heliocentric model, then, is a fragment of the universe. It exists under the influence of some medium, that is, within a certain galaxy. The galaxy, still within this encompassing system, leads us to the influence of the hierarchically highest encompassing control, that is, the entire universe, which is God and governs all processes, possessing intelligence in the subordinate universe. This is an example of spatial localization. Informational localization can have different characteristics. I will give you an example. That the same information can be placed in the preface of a book, in particular. Information about the book can be placed in the afterword. I also place this information. It can also be scattered throughout the book, in notes, appendices, and so on. Here is an example of informational localization. The interaction of the environment and the supersystem. Well, here is the familiar picture again. There is a supersystem, and there are its little elements, many, many. The entire supersystem is subjected to the influence of the environment, that is, the encompassing system. And all of this is within the framework of the hierarchically highest encompassing management. For each of the little elements of this supersystem, the entire supersystem is part of the environment. That is, we take this little element, and this little element influences this little element and this little element. And the rain falls on it. If I am sitting in front of you, I am an element of the supersystem. But other elements influence me, bosses, subordinates, relatives, acquaintances. They do influence me, right? The encompassing system influences me. Rain, snow, cold, heat are falling. All of this affects me, that is, in relation to me. That is, why are you angry? Is an element of the supersystem. The supersystem is a dominating factor encompassing me. Well, what the classics said, you cannot live in society and be free from society. Therefore, even from such scientifically grounded views, quite specific conclusions follow for those who want to be, and I am in non-politics, and I will manage on my own. They will find you, even in the forest. Father Vissarion, he went into the forest, took his flock and says, civilization is perishing. When it perishes, we will come out of the forest and start building a new life. But even there, the tax inspector finds him. His flock has sued him because he collected money from them as they sold apartments in St. Petersburg to get to the city of the sun. They made contributions to him, and then he says, we did not get along in character. He says, but I have no money. They say, give it back. That is, it is impossible to hide anywhere. Therefore, it should be understood that the entire environment affects every element of the supersystem. One can also reflect on global politics, both internal and external. Remember what we talked about in particular in the introductory lecture when we said, that is, nothing will come of it. But all elements are autonomous, generally speaking, in nature. And regarding the material carrier, the information support. That is, I possess this information, others possess different information. You have different measures of understanding there. But all elements are, in one way or another, connected to the supersystem as a whole. Therefore, the supersystem as a whole is also autonomous to some extent in relation to the environment. But the environment exerts its pressure on it. But in relation to the environment, the supersystem can be, and here are three options. The first option, the supersystem is not closed in relation to the environment. That is, the environment does not exert influence on it. The environment tries, but it cannot do anything. The supersystem self-governs within the hierarchically highest encompassing management. The second option can sustain its existence at the expense of the environment's resources. That is, you see another picture? There is the supersystem, and the environment exerts its influence and feeds the supersystem with its resources. And the third option can be a mutual exchange with the environment, meaning the environment exerts its influence, but the super system also influences the environment. Let's assign this in relation to human society. Here we are, a super system. What is the environment for us? The planet Earth, rains, winds, forests, seas, etc. Can we exist in isolation without the environment? No. The first option does not suit us. The second option does. Therefore, the environment nourishes us with resources, rains, water, food, bananas, and so on. All other things, well. And what about us? We intervene in the environment, meaning we act and exert influence on the environment. That is, there is an exchange with the environment. Now let's put it this way. Is the biosystem, the biosphere of planet Earth, nourished, or is it autonomous in relation to the surrounding environment, or is it nourished? Does the surrounding heliocentric model of the planet perhaps have no effect on it? It does. Because the rays of the sun shine, solar flares, and they cause either drought or something else. Everything happens. Day, night, cold, hot, meaning the environment intervenes. It exerts influence through its resources. Does the Earth exert influence on its surrounding environment or not? Well, it is obvious that it does, including even in the movement of planets. You know, the moon is held by the planet Earth, and its oscillations, how it spins, are affected by Earth's gravity. The same way, the Earth exerts influence on the sun, like other planets, and in forming that plasma component which determines the sun's behavior, the Earth also exerts its influence along with other planets on flares and other things. That is why this third type of interaction of the super system with the environment is characteristic for us. Now let's consider the informational support of the elements of the super system. I understand that there is a certain course happening now, and for some. Of course, it doesn't all fit in their heads right away, especially for older people, because the youth absorb everything. They are like a blank sheet of paper. I gave lectures to students at the International Commercial University. They are told that the world consists of 3 parts, and they write down matter, information, and the world. And older people say, this guy is saying that I wasn't taught this way. In other words, he is comparing information is not loaded into a void. Why am I saying this? To understand all of this correctly, we need to remember, keep in mind everything we have already studied before. And broadly speaking, what major things should we keep in mind? That the world is a unified whole, and all processes within it are oscillatory and represent an inseparable trinity process. Matter transforms as it develops. Here is the formula. In other words, the trinity, matter, information, measure. There is no formless matter, and each matter, therefore, is endowed with measure. Thus, the information it possesses is endowed with measure. There is no thing without form. Allah created everything and measured it with a measure. Here are 3 bricks that you should always remember. And what else should you remember? That all processes are manageable. There are no unmanageable processes. There are manageable processes and self-managing processes. But even to enter the mode of self-management, this self-management process must be organized. Therefore, to those who think that I am here independently, no. All of this is within the framework of a certain management hierarchy. And the transmission of information. What does information mean? An oscillatory process. They all carry some information endowed with a certain numerical quantitative measure. The sound of oscillations, the light of oscillations, and so on. Therefore, it is very important that we discuss these moments, not just for the sake of reasoning. And now the task is set for the informational support of the elements of the super system. What does informational support mean? And we must remember, information is inseparable from matter, from a material carrier, because there is no abstract information. It always resides on a material carrier. and information is always measured. A word is a code, measure. A letter is also a measure. Thus, any processes, such as oscillatory ones, are not endowed with a measure. So either a certain frequency is constant, that is also a measure. If there is some code in the frequency, then that is also a measure. Therefore, when I seemingly talk about the informational support of the elements of the supersystem, you must remember everything I just said, that this is a trinity process, that the transmission of information is always management. Information is transmitted through a material carrier. Information is endowed with a measure, and so on. And the transmission of information changes the state of another fragment, and so on. Such a scheme should always be present in a person. This is exactly what the ancient Egyptian priesthood deprived us of. Remember, these two little pyramids. Everything I am telling you, they did not give us. What did they give? From here, everyone knows their own. Lyric, physics, and that's it. But they did not provide such a comprehensive understanding. For what purpose? To deceive us. That's all. That is, to manipulate consciousness and thus control it.